I decided to write a book about Philippine culinary heritage because I felt that we were losing something. When I'd ask people about recipes or ingredients, they'd be at a loss for answers. And that's when I started doing my research. But I felt it was too selfish for me to keep it to myself, so I started writing this book. I went around the country and realized that Filipino cuisine is much more complex and much more interesting than we try to portray it. It was such a revelation that Filipino cuisine is not just about the food, but it connects us to who we are and even to our indigenous spirituality. And it made me realize who I am as a person. When we talk of the identity of a Filipino, it's important that we not only talk about what we have today, but what we have lost. When you look into Filipino indigenous cooking, you would realize that the connection to nature and the connection to the spirit is a very important aspect. Cooking is actually a set of values. It's how you choose your ingredients, how you choose to cook, on how you choose to serve your food. We have the mechanical part of cooking, but the values in how we cook is lost. I really want my readers to feel a sense of pride in being Filipino. I really want people to connect to the cooking, to the cuisine, find themselves as Filipinos and take pride in our own heritage. The early inhabitants of island Southeast Asia were a people who relied on their surroundings for nourishment, making use of rudimentary tools and methods to add nuances to their dishes. From the most basic food that they consumed, a multitude of influences contributed a variety of tastes and textures to their cuisine. In the early days of island Southeast Asia, our early inhabitants acquired ideas and practices from neighboring civilizations that would eventually shape the food that they ate. Long before the Spaniards arrived, we already had relations with the Arabs, the Hindus, and the Chinese who have enriched not only our cuisine, but our culture. The influence of the Arabs and the Hindus in Philippine cuisine can be seen in the cooking of our rice cakes and rice dishes. Arab traders brought strong spices like turmeric, which were used to season rice dishes like the brihe. Indian rice cakes inspired our own versions like the puto, bibingka, and suman, which were used in our pre-Hispanic religious practices. Religion was an integral part of the early inhabitants' life. Depending on the environment for their survival, helped shape the religious beliefs that centered on nature.
Most Filipinos, before the coming of Islam and Christianity, were overwhelmingly animist. Animist meaning we revered the spirits of our ancestors. We also revered the spirits of natural things around us. For example, the spirit of the mountain, the spirit of rocks, the spirit of particular trees.
Their religious rituals involved food, which they used to placate, petition, and thank the deities and ancestors who the early inhabitants believed provided them with a steady supply of food.
Sa Ilocos, napansin ko, hanggang ngayon, nag-aata ng mga Ilocano sa kanilang mga ninuno. Halimbawa, mag-iihaw ka ng karne o magluluto ka ng tupig na parang suman, iaalay mo yun sa ninuno mo, sa bahay mo. So, nahuhubog pati ang ating pagtingin sa pagkain.
Our early inhabitants believed that since food is a product of the earth, cooking and eating connects them to the earth and to each other. Food was a sacred covenant between man and nature, and our early inhabitants recognized that the source of their food had to be respected. Life in island Southeast Asia was gaining momentum. Trading outposts established by the local communities teamed with commercial activity, attracting more people to settle here, adding their own influence to local cuisine.
The Philippines has been a trading partner of China since 1,000 years ago. There were commodities that were obtained in the Philippines and brought to China, and then also vice versa.
Some of the Chinese traders decided to settle here, forming a small community of Chinese families in Manila.
Most of the traders from China were from the localities of Fujian and Guangdong, those regions from the southern Chinese coasts. And these people brought along with them their cuisine into the Philippines when they traded and eventually intermarried and lived with the local population.
Chinese ingredients slowly found their way into the dishes of our early inhabitants, many of which are staples in the foods we continue to eat until today.
So for example, we can see cornstarch in some of our soups, and also the use of noodles. And also the prevalent use of the soybean in many forms.
Among all of these, one soy product was the most pivotal in the evolution of an important Filipino dish. My suspicion is that the adobo originally started as a paksiw. It's possible that before the Chinese arrived, our adobo resembled this dish, which is a fish or meat stew cooked in vinegar. And with the introduction of soy sauce into the Filipino kitchen, it was added to the dish to be able to make what we call now as our adobo. The Chinese also taught us new ways of cooking our native dishes through the tools they brought in with them.
The idea of using metal iron vats for cooking in came in with the Chinese.
One of the most important things that the Chinese brought before the arrival of the Spaniards was iron, which was used to make our agricultural tools. That's why during that period, we were able to plant and cultivate a lot of seeds that the Chinese brought. And secondly, it was also used to make the wok or the kawali, which allowed Filipino food to evolve further by introducing new cooking methods such as the gisa and deep frying. One of the dishes that experienced an evolution because of the introduction of the kawali is the tinola or the tuwa, which was simply a boiled dish. When the wok was introduced, stir frying or sauteing was possible. So instead of just boiling the aromatics, the ginger was now sauteed in a little bit of oil to bring out a more pronounced flavor. So, not only did it change the cooking method, it also changed the flavor profile of the dish. Another possible evolution was the pinakbet, which is a vegetable stew. Pinakbet actually means wilted or cooked till wilted in Ilocano. And the dish is actually cooked by layering vegetables in a clay pot or the palayok until it cooks in its own juices until it becomes really tender. But when the wok was introduced, it was stir-fried and it was now cooked just to a right crispness so that the Chinese could probably eat it with a chopstick. The kawali eventually became the tool of choice in the Filipino kitchen because it was more durable than the breakable palayok. It was also more efficient in cooking because metal is a better conductor of heat than clay. And it also allowed more versatility in the kitchen. It allowed the Filipino cook to fry, stir fry, boil, steam, toast, and do all sorts of stuff with just one cooking implement. Close relations with the Chinese allowed Filipinos to incorporate ingredients and cooking methods that would infuse their native dishes with extra layers of flavor and texture. Chinese influence had such an indelible mark that it would continue to make its presence felt even after the arrival of the Spanish.